Hello and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview, where we take a look at stories being followed in the upcoming edition of the North Coast Journal. I am your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined by North Coast Journal's news editor, Thad Greenson, and the arts and features editor, Jennifer Famiko Cahill. Welcome, guys.
Hello. Hi.
Thanks for having us back.
Yeah, this is really great. Let's dive right in and hear about what is going on in the North Coast Journal. Thad, what's on the cover for this week?
Yeah, this week's cover story is taking a deep dive into testing, COVID-19 testing. We'd kind of come to the realization that whether it was on Facebook or just in everyday conversations with people, this is the biggest question people had is just what is going on with testing? How does it work? Why can't they just test everybody? So we tried to answer those questions. The very short answer is there just are not enough tests to go around. The people tend to think of tests as kind of this like one encapsulated thing, but really it's like a series of really technical procedures, and each of those needs like specialized equipment and specialized supplies. And so kind of testing starts at the provider level when somebody sticks usually a deep nasal swab in your nose and takes a sample, which I've heard is terribly unpleasant. So not something you want to do. But then that swab has to be put in a specialized container and shipped in another specialized container to a testing lab, where then it is put in specialized equipment and mixed with very specialized reagents and to come up with a negative or a positive test. And everybody, every community across the nation and in some parts of the world are trying to ramp up these testing capacities. So all of a sudden, everything from the swabs to the test tubes to the chemical reagents themselves have become in just tremendously high demand. And it's hard for anybody to keep up with, keeping the supply chains open and get everything they need. So just a couple numbers that I found really interesting. To date, Humboldt County has tested 2,086 people. And per capita, we're doing fairly good compared to the national rate, which is just a little bit higher than where we're at. And we're actually better than the state rate as far as the portion of our population that we've tested. The problem is that as we attempt to do things like move out of shelter in place or ease shelter in place restrictions, testing becomes more and more important because we want to not just be reactive to treating people that have the virus or treating people that are sick, but finding people who have the virus and might not have symptoms and keeping them home and keeping them isolated so they don't infect other people. And so once you start moving to more like defensive testing or surveillance testing, as they call it, you need just a much bigger quantity of tests. So, for example, the public health is opening a testing lab or testing site in Eureka, and it has a capacity to test 96 people a day, which is good, and it definitely increases our capacity. But
how does that compare to now?
So now, on average, we're testing about 54 people a day. And that's from the beginning, and that's kind of fluctuated up to a high of around 90 and then a low of about 49. But the daily average has been 54.
And so this would be added to that.
Right. And so it's a big increase. But one of the things they want to do is start doing surveillance testing of like frontline healthcare workers. There are 1,500 nurses in Humboldt County. So you think about, with that capacity, that's, 2 weeks just to test all the nurses. And the test measures, 1 point in time. So, if you want to keep making sure that healthcare workers aren't infected, you need to keep testing them. So, nationally, some big think tanks have looked at this issue and and tried to figure out how many tests we need on a national level. And what, their conservative estimates is that we need to test between 2 and 8% of the population every day. So they're saying that nationally we need between like 5 and 20 million tests every single day. In Humboldt County, 2% of our population is almost 2,700 tests, 600 more than we've done to date. 8% of the population would be almost 11,000 tests. So when we're talking about really ramping up to do real surveillance testing and keep eyes on vulnerable populations, people who mix with vulnerable populations, and then just testing people who are symptomatic, it's a huge undertaking. And really, I think local Office of Emergency Services and Public Health are doing everything they can to keep up the supply chain and make sure they have some tests on hand. But the supply chain just isn't there in kind of the mass quantities that are needed.
So not to put you on the spot, but if there are limitations to the supply chain and there are limitations to the daily number of tests that we expect we'll be able to ramp up to in the near future, in the context of what our plan is to go forward, which was outlined a little bit by Sheriff Hansel and Dr. Frankovich last week, they talked about putting in place a roadmap for businesses in the community and just our community writ large, how we could roll out a plan that included testing. What are your insights on our ability to kind of meet that ongoing, aspiration to open up a little bit?
Well, I think two things. One is people from the governor's framework. He's made clear that kind of we're in stage one right now. And stage one is really holding in place and trying to build capacity. And so that's everything from building testing capacity to also building hospital capacity and kind of make sure all that infrastructure is in place before we take the next step. And so, that's where we're going to be for, I think, at least the next couple of weeks, is really just kind of holding in place and letting them try to ramp up capacity and secure better supply chains. Hopefully there'll be some federal help as far as really ramping up manufacturing of all these testing components. And then the next step is going to be really measured, I think. I think at least locally, it seems like public health officials and the sheriff are really recognize that you don't want to overstep with that, moving to that next stage. And so I think you're going to see soft openings of very limited number of other businesses for, curbside retail pickup and things like that, but still really maximize social distancing and stuff like that. The other thing I'd say is that I think public health is rightfully trying to build up an internal supply. So they currently have, I think, enough supplies on hand to test 900 samples, and they're trying to slowly grow that. But they want to make sure that when we hit that point of taking the next step, there's not a testing shortage then. So that if we run if we overstep slightly or we see an uptick in cases, that then they're not limited in their ability to kind of contain those new cases by a lack of testing. So it's a really delicate dance.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the background details and also for keeping monitoring the situation so closely, because I know things are changing week by week. So we'll sort of check in, I guess, next week and see how our testing capacity unfolds.
Hopefully there's a lot more of it.
Yeah, seriously, from your mouth to the ears of God, ceiling cat, or whoever it is you look up to. Jennifer, what's going on your beat these days? What are you covering this week in the Journal?
Well, first I wanted to talk just really briefly about the signs that you're going to start seeing at food businesses around town. Right now it's starting with restaurants, but it's expected to roll out into markets, grocery stores, etc., and then other kinds of businesses. These are these Kelly green bordered signs that say that this business is compliant with social distancing, all the measures that we have in place for shelter in place to slow the spread of COVID-19. So, for example, if you go into a restaurant and you see this in the window, it's meant to assure the public that this is a place where precautions are being taken in terms of hygiene, in terms of social distancing, in terms of how the staff are interacting with customers, how much they're cleaning high-touch surfaces, etc., and whether they're wearing masks and requiring customers to wear masks, etc. So Sheriff Hansel was in a media availability video talking about how they're going to sort of enforce this. But, when you see a grade in the window, you see that little A at your favorite restaurant that says that the health department has given this place a very good grade, you feel good about it. There's no inspection required to get one of these green signs. There is only really a promise on behalf of the employees or the owner of the business. Someone has to sign an affidavit under penalty of perjury in order to get one of these. Wow. And it will say, we're keeping 6 feet distance, we're doing the frequent hand washing, et cetera, et cetera.
Wearing masks.
wearing masks. However, there is no set inspection that you need in order to get through the process. You just fill out the paperwork. There are going to be no planned, pop inspections of facilities. What the Sheriff's Department seems to be relying on in terms of holding businesses accountable is us narking on them. So if I go into a restaurant and I see that employees are smushed together, or if I see that people are not wearing masks, or that customers and employees are very close together, then I have a phone number right on the sign that I can call and let them know. Since a lot of what happens in restaurant work is behind the scenes, one assumes that employees are supposed to report their employers. If, for example, they need to, as many restaurants do, pass close by each other. In a lot of kitchens, especially small kitchens, it's, think about your favorite restaurant. It's probably got a pretty small kitchen in Humboldt County. There are a few places that are big and roomy. I wrote about Larapin, and their kitchen is a big space, and they've cut their staff so that people can be 2 feet apart. But in other places, I spoke to Surfside Burgers. They have to pass in a 2-foot space at some point. It's just how restaurants are built. And if you've ever worked in a kitchen, you've had the experience of someone saying knives behind you, right? So, or, if you've just worked in my house. But, it's a difficult balance, like Thad was saying. The hope on the part of the county is that this will give consumers confidence in terms of going out and using businesses that are, tagged as essential businesses, like restaurants that have takeout and curbside. But it's a difficult balance, because there is always mission creep. There is always, that moment when I watched a video yesterday of a restaurant that I know and love, that showed how they're doing curbside delivery, and it's perfectly safe. And one of the staff walks out and hands a bag through a car window to a customer waiting. And that's less than 6 feet. That's direct contact. It's really tricky. And it's going to be a learning process, a learning curve for a lot of businesses and a lot of customers too. And, we've gotten emails at the Journal from people out in the world complaining about how this or that restaurant is handling social distancing. So I think it's going to be a bit of a rocky road. But it's going to be interesting to see who ends up with one of these, who doesn't, and whether or not that really affects their businesses, whether that affects whether a customer is going to want to go and get takeout from one or another place.
What's interesting, though, is it is a proactive plan laid out for people. It's best practices, but then it's also a covenant. It's a covenant in the sense that they did require, this plan does include that affidavit component. So people are swearing that they're going to try, I guess, or not try. They're swearing that they're going to take action, take proactive steps. And so it puts a burden on all of us a little bit as citizens. There's the responsibility as employees in the restaurants. There's the responsibility as customers in restaurants. And so I think this is it's a citizenship workshop that we have going on here.
Something to think about. I don't know if you've had this experience yet, but while we're in shelter in place, there have been those moments, I think, when or at least for me, for example, in walking down the street, seeing someone that we recognize while we're on a walk, and they come a little too close.
Yeah.
And you kind of back up, but there's a weird social pressure, right? There's I don't want to offend you, and yet there's a weird, I don't know, it's a kind of inertia that comes over you. And, thank God I have decades of training being rude, but for other people, it must be very difficult. It must be hard for you all to say, please step back. And in the same way, a restaurant that you know and love, it's going to be hard for you to call in or even to complain. How many people, the waitress comes and says, how's your meal? And it's terrible. You hate it. It's burned. And everybody says, it's fine. Thank you. I worry about those impulses, that it's hard to retrain ourselves in that sense.
We're going to be learning together. In the last few minutes that we have left, and also I should explicitly state, thank you for telling us about this new plan for the community, because people I think are, really interested in getting out there and sort of trying to reintegrate. And this is one stepping stone for all of us. But so I was going to say, in the last minute or so, I know, is there something else that you wanted to share with us before we end it for the week?
Yes. 2 things you should absolutely do. One is read Simona Carini's 2008, I think, piece that we are rerunning about MFK Fisher's How to Cook a Wolf.
What?
Settle down, animal activists.
Okay.
How to cook
She's
a wolf.
onto something, right, with that?
Yes. MFK Fisher wrote about cooking during wartime rationing during World War II. And among many wonderful observations she has about food, cooking, humanity, and survival, she talks about the dignity of eating and taking pleasure in eating and cooking and nourishing ourselves and other people during hard times. And Simona talks about that and shares her version of a recipe that takes almost nothing to make. Again, another one of these things that's got like 3 things in it. It is a French onion soup that is, she makes a vegetarian version, but I also recommend that everybody order the collected MFK Fisher if you're out of things to read and you don't want to read Little Fires Everywhere with everyone else. MFK Fisher's collected works, including How to Cook a Wolf, will sustain you and make you understand food writing in America, honestly. It's
so
beautiful.
there's a taste of it in online available in the article that we can check out before we go
There
buy the
is.
book.
And a great recipe for when all you've got is literally onions.
Okay. Fantastic, guys. That'll just about do it for us this week. Thank you both for your insights. We really appreciate it. Everybody out there, check it out. Check out North Coast Journal online. Stay informed, and everybody be safe. Thanks, guys.
Stay
Till next
home.
time.
Thanks. Wear a mask.
Bye, guys.
Bye.